The Quinta de Noval unfiltered late bottled vintage port is a very important part of Quinta de Noval's range, and it's a wine that I take extremely seriously. A late bottled vintage port is a wine from a single harvest, but as its name implies, it is bottled later than a classic vintage port. This is important because a vintage port would be bottled 2 years after the harvest and then is destined to age some years in bottle before it's really ready to drink. Whereas a late bottled vintage is usually bottled 4, 5 or even 6 years after the harvest, and the extra aging in large barrels allows the vine to develop, which means that by the time we put it in bottle, it's ready to drink. This particular wine is the 2013 unfiltered late bottled vintage from Quinta de Noval. Like all our port wines from the Quinta, and this is 100% from the vineyards of Quinta de Noval, it's foot-trodden in stone lagars. This is the old-fashioned traditional way of making great port in the Douro, and we are completely dedicated to making port in this way at Quinta de Noval for our vintage ports, for our late bottled vintage ports, and for our wines destined to become old tawny ports. So it's first trodden by foot in lagars, and then it will be aged, in the case of this 2013, for 5 years in large wooden barrels. I say large, it's important to get an idea of the scale. They contain about 6,000 litres, so these are big barrels. It's also important to know that we never put this wine in barrels of new oak, because the last thing we want is for the wine to have a taste of new oak. What we're really looking for is the porosity of the wood, which enables the wine to breathe inside these large oak barrels and to develop slowly over those first 4 to 5 years of its life, so that by the time we bottle it, it's absolutely ready to drink. It's important to underline the distinctive characteristics of the Quinta de Noval late bottled vintage. The first and most important is that it's single vineyard. It comes exclusively from grapes, from the great Quinta de Noval vineyard in the heart of the Douro. As I said, treated exactly the same way as we treat our vintage ports in the vinification, treading by foot. There is no filtering, as is the case with the vintage port. The result is a wine that is extremely serious port. It gives you a very good glimpse into the true quality of the Quinta de Noval vineyard. Of course, the supreme expression of that is the vintage port, but vintage port has the disadvantage that we don't make very much of it, and you have to wait a long time sometimes for it to age in bottle before it really reaches its peak. This wine is ready to drink now, and we don't make very much of it either. We only made about 3,500 cases of this wine. So Quinta de Noval's late bottled vintage is a really strict selection from a very great vineyard. This wine represents about 12% of the production of the great Quinta de Noval vineyard in the year 2013, which is really not very much. The result is a really great glass of vintage port. It has all the freshness and brightness and purity of fruit that you would expect from a port from Quinta de Noval, and it also has structure, tannic complexity. It's a wine that's wonderful to drink now, but if you actually do want to keep it, it will age for many years and actually improve. The choice is up to you. I hope you enjoy the wine.